Hey folks, welcome to Thinking Theology. I'm Don. Some folks out there are like, thinking theology is an oxymoron merely because they don't believe in God. Now, I don't care if people believe in God or not. I have my own views on this. I don't believe in the God of the Bible per se. I don't believe that's not my account, my paradigm, my view of life. But I think when you say things like that, you don't have an appropriate view of thinking. Okay, because we could think about a lot of things, whether they exist or not. At one point, people didn't think germs existed, for instance. They didn't even know. There was just something wrong with them. So I'm saying, lighten up a little bit. I'm not espousing a view in God. I'm not saying God doesn't exist. I just analyze arguments, and that's what I'm looking at today. It's kind of been, I don't know, I saw something on YouTube, and I think 60 Minutes had something with the Pope on feminism and this sort of thing. Should women be allowed to teach in church? Now, this is going to be predicated upon biblical texts, and arguments are assessed based on the premises employed. And that's how I view it. So I'm going to say, based on these premises, does the argument make sense, along with maybe some available information? So I'm not going to say whether I think women should be allowed to teach in church or not. I don't go to church. I don't care. But there's a verse in 1 Corinthians 14:35. It says, and if they, women, right, will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for women to speak in the church. Okay, now today people would say, oh, that's just sexist and yada, yada, yada. Well, partly that's because not only have times changed, times have changed is a meaningless expression. Yes, times change. What changed and why? One, the battle that was raging back then over Christianity has largely been won in the Western world. It's large, as people, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, by and large, the United States, Christian, the UK, Christian, so forth. That battle was won. So now that Christianity and educational institutions and such make education available to everybody, the culture has changed. In that sense, the time has changed. So what does that mean culturally? There's another verse, 1 Timothy 2:12, where Paul, in his letter to Timothy, says, but I suffer or allow not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. So in understanding that, I'll first make this point. The way you interpret any verse in the Bible depends on whether or not you think the Bible is the Word of God. That implies the dictation theory, that God told these people what to write, and they dutifully or mindlessly did not insert their own will, words, or understanding into it. They just dutifully wrote it down, sort of like robots or monkeys on demand. And that's how you have a lot of preachers say that there's only one author of the Bible, and it's God. It's like, well, there are various letters with different authors' names on them written at different times, and so that needs to be accounted for. You account for it as you will. I already have for myself. But if you think God had these people pen what's written in there and it's flawless, then that is going to inform you that these verses are good throughout all time until Christ returns, and then there's another dispensation, another world, another law, another what have you. But things will be different. But until then, this must be instituted and kept pristine in the church. No women teaching, no women talking. Another approach is that the letters were written by people giving their best account of what they thought was going on at the time, their best account of God, of Jesus, of morality, of salvation, of how to conduct things. Paul was very aggressive, and he wanted to lay down the law in the church based on the cultural norms at the time and his personal mission of growing the church. At that time, the church itself was largely illiterate. In fact, the entire world back then was largely illiterate. The age of universities and widespread educational institutions, like in America, we have kindergarten, we have like grammar school, then we go to middle school, then high school, then a lot of folks go to college, and some go beyond that. Education is freely available. We tend to look at things anachronistically, thinking that, the women and the men, for that matter, were literate and could read, and they could read their Bibles all by themselves. Well, the printing press hadn't been invented yet until Gutenberg came along. So there were no mass texts back then, even if people could read. Estimates are over 95% of the ancient world was illiterate. It was an agrarian culture. People needed to eat, grow plants, and such. Education was not a luxury most of them could afford. So when somebody was literate or educated, by and large, it would have been a man at the time. So the instruction might have been a practical one. I'm not saying it was. I'm just putting this out there to help you think this through a little bit, maybe differently, that Paul may have been saying, look, stop inquiring in these services. The church itself grew out of Judaism. And in Judaism, and you can see it today, Orthodox Jews, observant Jews, conservative Jews today, they worship separately. The men and women worship separately. They're very different worlds, very different approaches. I'm here in New Jersey, not far from Brooklyn, where the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn has Hasidim, Lubavitch, and other very conservative texts. They not only don't intermingle much with the outside world, so to speak, certainly not with Gentiles, but the men and women are very separate, and the women are largely uneducated. The men themselves are able to get educated, mostly in Torah. This may have been why Paul said back then that, look, ask your husbands at home. Don't interrupt whatever might be going on in a service. Ask your husband at home. He'll know, or he might know. But now, I'll bring it forward into today. Women raise children, and they teach them. They have to. They have to teach them practical things to keep them safe. Other things like don't eat the candy before dinner. Whatever we're taught by our mothers, we're taught how things work. We are taught morality. We're taught that you can't hit your siblings. Stop hitting them. Mothers work with their children and educate them. It may not be in a formal setting like a synagogue or a church or some other academic institution. Today it is in many ways. But my question would be, if mothers have so much to do with their children raising them, at what point does their wisdom and understanding of the world stop working? And it's just a question that I ask, that knowledge and understanding is knowledge and understanding regardless of who it comes from. So if a person, a woman in this case, is raising her children, at what age should she shut her mouth and stop teaching her children things? And now today, if that woman happens to be Christian, when she goes to a church, if you believe that the Bible is the Word of God, dictated by God, and that women should not talk, what is your proposed age that a mother who is obviously older than her children and more experienced in the world and how things work, at what age should she be handed a restraining order from teaching her children or anybody else? And these are practical considerations, because I generally look at things from a practical and a logical standpoint, and that's simple. So leave your comments, folks. It's an interesting conversation to be had, but it does illustrate the difference between the way in which the Bible was written for those who believe it's the Word of God, doesn't have mistakes in it. God told these people what to write. Therefore, it's directly from Him for all ages until He makes a change. Or people writing their individual accounts. That is my view, by the way. People writing their individual accounts of how things worked and were to work. And that has other implications, social, cultural, and other relevant considerations. So there it is. All right, folks. Leave your comments. I read them. Have a great day. I'll see you on another video, and keep thinking theology. And no, that's not an oxymoron.